reports.
Hello, Michael.
What you with?
How are you?
Fine, fine, how are you?
I'm getting along now.
Good, good.
Yeah, I can almost see you again. Oh, somebody said recognized you.
No,
Must
Well,
have
that's
been-
something. Oh, hi, Phil.
How are you?
Oh, it was by your voice.
Oh, okay. How's Cal?
Wonderful. No, actually, the writer's going to.
Yeah, as always. Oh, happy with that.
I used the 494, so you stay off.
Oh,
Good turnout today.
okay.
I do.
Good.
Good.
What are you doing there?
I'll try and get all the stories that we can get.
How did you know I had a haircut?
When do you
Well,
usually adjourn?
because we have,
The Seagate
you
out
know,
there.
you can get them talking.
Oh, they don't kick you out.
Do they help?
This nice at a certain
Do
time.
they help?
Oh, okay.
No,
Where's your hair?
So, but on a typical meeting, is it an hour?
They don't do it any good?
no, never 2 hours, maybe sometimes only 45 minutes.
Oh, okay.
But then we can talk about the stories that are written out.
I think the last time you came is when he did his story. Yeah. And I made Amish cinnamon bread.
That's right, yeah, that
radio.
Wow, yeah. No, I was trying to get the names. Hi, Lloyd. Of the guys who, here. Lloyd came too.
I'm gonna tell a story.
They're gonna put it.
We will call the meeting to order. I would like somebody to lead us in the pledge. Walt, how do you feel like you can do that?
Yeah.
Anybody that can stand, the rest of them don't bother.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with justice and peace for all.
I think maybe we'll have a roll call of the board of directors, and we'll start with you. Cal Twining?
Oh, Walt home.
Busalis, Michael C.
Bill Henry.
Okay.
Like I say, when I met Kevin, everywhere I go, I always talk about the Merchant Mariners. And when I started to tell Kevin about it, he said, "Do you get them to talk to you?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Their stories are marvelous." And for some reason, he never has gotten Merchant Mariners who really open up and tell their story. So I was like, great, you have to come, because these guys are fabulous. And your stories are worth being heard. So I don't know, do you want to go start in one area? Or
Oh, I want to start with this guy right here.
Mike Busalis.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah.
Well, what I had in mind was, I'll ask a question, and that's just to get this started, and then maybe we'll just go around the table, and if you don't want to answer or something, you can pass. But the idea or the goal is to get some of the information and stories. So the first question is, what is your name, and how did you come to serve in the Merchant Marine? And maybe we'll go this way. Would you mind being first?
No.
Okay. So what's your name, and how did you come to serve in the Merchant Marine?
Want me to start now?
Yeah.
Oh, Merchant Marine. When I was 16 years old, I ran away from home and I got into the Navy. I took the examination and everything, and I had to sneak out of the house and to get down to the Minnesota Hotel at 0600 to go down to the Great Northern Depot. Well, my father, the old man, he had a restaurant down there. And as a young kid, I was more or less a rebel, but I was just, my brothers and all my relatives were going into the service, and I was getting, and I didn't like working in the restaurant. Anyway, I went down and I paid off a guy with a case of Muscatel wine to sign as my father to get me in the Navy. Anyway, I went down, physical examination. The doctor took a look at me and he says, well, kid, within 3 months, you're gonna have a lot of weight on you. We're shipping you out. So anyway, I had to get down to the hotel and to go down to the Great Northern Depot. As God would have it, we marched out from 3rd Street and Washington Avenue down to Nicollet Avenue, and then down to the Great Northern Depot. As we were marching down to the depot, was right in front of the old man's restaurant. And some of the customers seen me. And they gave me, hooray, Mike, give him hell, and all that, and went down to the depot. So we were waiting for the train, and all of a sudden, someone grabbed my hair and yanked me back and started slapping the hell out of me, and it was my old man. Still in his cook's hat and his greasy apron, and just cussing me out in Greek like crazy. And 2 big burly SP guys grabbed a hold of him. And some chief petty officer come running down, hash marks from here to here, ribbons here, wanting to know what was going on. And the old man in his broken English and all Greek, and the spit and venom that was coming out of his mouth over his mustache, was telling him, this is my kid, you can't take him, too young, all the BS and everything. Then the lieutenant came down and wanted to know what was the matter. Meantime, the SPs had me, and the Minneapolis cop, Frank Berry, that was his beat at the Great Northern Depot, came down and see what the commotion was, and he seen my old man, he says, Chris, what's the matter? He says, Betty, the son of a bitch is taking my kid, he's too young. Anyway, the outcome was that I had to go back with the lieutenant down to the recruiting station to get it all straightened out. Anyway, the chief petty officer got on a train and they left. Anyway, we got down to the recruiting station, and the lieutenant commander down there was in charge. He questioned me, and I told him the story and everything about I'm not good in school and I wanted to go in the Navy and all that. And he says, kid, you're too young, don't you understand? And the old man was going to work me over again. And the commander told him, now listen, Mr. Busalis, your kid is Navy property. He took the oath. You lay one more hand on him, and I'm going to put you down at one of the prisons down in, what the hell is the name of that prison down there, down in Missouri. But anyway, you not to lay a hand on him. When he turns 17, you bring him back, you understand? So anyway, we got that straightened out, and I went, boy, oh boy, for the next 2 weeks, I tell you, I never seen so many pots and pans and dishes in all my life. But anyway, FDR signed for 16-year-olds to enlist in a merchant marine. And I showed it to the old man. He didn't say another word. He grabbed me by the hair, yanked me, put it in the car, went down to 3rd Marquette, the 2nd floor, went up there, where it's a merchant marine, headquarters, whatever, and the old man puts me in there. He says, here, take the son of a bitch and make him a cook. Well, anyway, that's how I got into the merchant marine.
You were pretty independent at that age. Okay, well, we'll go with the next one here. What is your name, and how did you come to serve in the Merchant Marine?
My name is Bill Henry, and we didn't have anything out there. My father died when I was 5 years old. So at 14, I run away the first time. I went out to Seattle. I was raised in Missoula, Montana. And I went out there and I worked at Grayson's department store and Mayflower Hotel and things like that. And then we see this thing, when the next year when I run away again, 50, a free welding school. So this other kid from Montana and I go find out about it. They would give you 30 days at a welding school, feed you, had a place to stay, and then they'd take you down to the shipyard, and you had to pass the test. If you passed the test, you stayed there, Vancouver, Washington. And we both passed like that. So we worked about 2 or 3 months, and I told this Cal, I says, hey, up by my hand up in Port Angeles, Washington, there's a hot springs. So we bought a Model A for $50 between us. Drove up there to the hot springs in Olympic Peninsula. And we left there, we had a flat tire. We put the spare on, we didn't go a couple miles, another flat tire. So we run on the rim to my aunt's house outside of Port Angeles. Left the car. We hitchhiked into Port Angeles about 5 miles. We're standing on the dock. We don't know how the hell to get back to Vancouver. There's a rescue ship that was Coastal Geographic Survey before, and they made it into a rescue ship for Alaska. We're standing on the dock and the mate's up there. He hollers down, you guys looking for work? Yeah, how old are you? We both said 18. We're both, he's 17, I'm 16. But I had changed my birth certificate to get into welding school. Instead of born in 1927, I changed it with an old dip pin, 1925, and they looked at it, great. So that's how we got to go to sea on this rescue ship. We run to Alaska, salvaging ships up there. And then a couple trips of that, I decided to go deep sea. And I joined the SIU, and away I went.
Well, you guys are pretty feisty at that age. I'm detecting a pattern here.
But I thought I went young. I had an uncle that went to Canada in 1912 or something and homesteaded up there. He had 13 kids, and my son did a family tree about 5 years ago, and he found all these people. And Blanche Henry out in Vancouver, British Columbia, married the youngest of the 13 kids. And when I emailed her that I was 16 when I went, she emailed back, she says, my husband joined the Canadian Army at 14.
Oh, jeez.
You got away with it, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Okay, what's your name and how did you come to serve in the Merchant Marine?
Ralph J. Mahola, and I signed up April 12th, 45, the day Roosevelt died, and they let me finish high school, and I went into maritime in June, and U.S. Navy as an ensign. I went with Annapolis guys and worked my way up to 4 stripes. I stayed 25 years.
Oh,
Because it paid better than Dad did on the farm. You didn't get paid on the farm.
yeah.
So I stayed there 25 years. Right now, I'm the oldest living member of a union out of New York, 45 years on pension.
Oh, well,
But I'm
congratulations.
still working yet a little bit.
Thank
I'll
you.
pass.
Thank you. Okay, what is your name and how did you come to serve in the Merchant Marine?
I'm Richard Smith, and I was deferred during the war on the farm. But I found out all my classmates had been drafted or went in the Merchant Marine, some of them. I decided that I wanted to do something like that. My dad agreed, so I joined the Cadet Corps, which had a training program at that time of about 6 months. It's now 4 years. But anyway, we had a sea project about that thick that you had to do. You had to draw all the steam system and the lube oil system and condensate system, and you got to really know the ship. And we were in San Francisco after I'd been out there for about a month, and had an old chief engineer must have been 75 years old. And the captain called, I was on the 48 watch, the captain called and said, let's, gotta move the ship.
You didn't
So
sign
I
it.
called the chief engineer, he said, I don't know how to move the ship, you gotta do it.
Mike was talking and he didn't get this one.
Moved the ship to a loading dock and we sailed out in the Pacific, went to New Guinea, and that was a terrible place. Mosquitoes all over the place. And we discharged the cargo and then came back across the Pacific empty and loaded again and went back out.
Oh, you signed it?
And after the 6 months, I went to the academy and got my license. I went to work for a fellow called Ludwig. I don't know if anybody knows him. Daniel
He
Ludwig.
signed another one.
He had a couple of ships before the war. And during the war, the government needed operators for ships and they considered him an operator. So they gave him about 20 ships to operate at cost plus 10%. He made a ton of money during the war. And afterward, he had his own shipyard and I worked for him. I sailed for 8 years. And then I left and I bought a Liberty ship. I paid $75,000 for it.
Really? Huh.
And I sailed to Japan, came back, made $95,000 on that trip. So then finally I bought 4 Liberties. And then I quit sailing and ordered some new ships in Japan. Had them built, all carriers. And finally, the last ship I had was a GTS Admiral Callahan.
Really?
Admiral Callahan. You know that ship?
No, but my last name is Callahan, so.
Had 50,000 horsepower and cost $30,000 a day in those days just for fuel. So the government, I was gonna lay it up, the government didn't like it, so they bought it and they operated it. Now I don't have anything to do with ships, I just make maple syrup.
Well, you guys had very long careers with this. Well, Sue, I assume you were too young to be in the Merchant Marine in World War II. So, would you talk maybe your husband, what your husband did, or?
Well, he quit school as a sophomore and went in, he was 17, and folks had to sign for him.
Mm-hmm.
And he landed up in Sheepshead Bay on Christmas Eve. He'd never been away from home before. And they took him to a movie. Everybody, of course, was so lonesome, they were crying. Every time he heard Silent Night, he would cry. But anyway, he just didn't go to school, and so he decided he was going to go in the Merchant Marines. And then he did the wrong thing. He told them, get me out of here. Give me the first ship that's going out of here. I want to see the world. So he ended up in that tanker, which was the worst one that could have been. But so he got out to sea and got in the Battle of Leyte and almost got killed there because they shot a plane right behind the ship. And of course the tanker has tons and tons of explosives on it. And I've been paying his dues right along, so they sent me a certificate and a card that I'm a U.S. Merchant Mariner. So I guess there's not too much more to say.
What was your husband's name?
Charles Meyer.
And did you meet him after the war?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
I met him later. He went and came out and he went in the Merchant or the National Guard.
Yeah.
And then he was activated into the Army.
Yeah.
And he got his GED there because they were gonna do a hike one day and does anybody want to get their GED? Of course, he raised his hand. He didn't study, but he got a 98, so it was quite a deal.
Thank you. And what is your name and how did you come to serve in the Merchant Marine?
My name is Walter Holm, and early in '42, my dad and I went out to Richmond, California, and went to work in the shipyards, building the Liberty ships. And I had done a little previous welding experience at the vocational school. And so when they asked me what I could do, welding, okay, but did some training, you know. And pretty soon I was welding everything. And did that for just about a year. And being that my dad was an old sailor on the sailing ships, I knew a little bit about the sea and what have you, and I thought, boy, it's going to be interesting. I'm going to sail one of these buggers. So I went over to San Francisco to the Sailors Union of the Pacific Union Hall, and they marched me to the Coast Guard and got the pictures and all the stuff that's necessary. And about 2 days I was on an old schooner, coastwise lumber schooner sailing vessel in San Francisco Harbor for a training session. Training session lasted 3 days. Boxed a compass, learned a bunch of knots and stuff like that. Learned port and starboard and all that. I knew all that anyhow. So 3 days on there, and then I was on the Liberty ship for 4 days getting loaded and headed off to the South Pacific. And shuttled around in the South Pacific, all the islands down there and what have you. From there on, I was just sailing all the oceans, and wherever the ships went, I sailed Liberties and tankers, T2 tankers. And went to Australia, you know, and the Persian Gulf and India. We hauled a lot of high-octane airplane gas up to Calcutta, India for the China, Burma, India. The guys flying the hope with the C-47s and what have you. But anyhow, that's about concise. That's how I got in there.
So you did see the world during World War II?
I have never quit.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Who's next?
Town planning.
My name's Cal Twining, and I joined up in 1943, latter part of the year. My cousin and I had left Des Moines to go to California to work in a shipyard. And after we got out there and got to work the first day, it was raining. We're down below the putting the engine rigging. And we don't have a place to sleep with the car. We can't get a place to sleep. So as we went out the gate, we signed out and went back to Iowa. And when I got back, there was a thing in the paper about joining the Merchant Marine, and that's what I did. 1943. Got called up for my training in January of 44. And put 3 months training in there, and met a buddy of mine from my hometown I didn't know at the time, but we kept being good buddies. And we found out that if you get out of there real fast, you'd be a messman instead of anything else. You had to wait. So we took the messman trip. And at the end of the 3 months, they said you had 8-day liberty. Well, they didn't do it, so we took it. We came back, and they didn't even know he was gone, but we didn't know that. And so they was going to put us up for captain's mast. So I started bugging the guy in the shipping deal to give us a ship. He finally got us a ship on the Great Lakes. So that was my first ship. We left there after we were sailing on the Great Lakes for a while, and went to California. Hitchhiked out there. And we caught a ship. I got a picture of it, in fact, here. The SS Argentina. We took a load of troops, USO people, Air Force, and all the way to Bombay, India. Came back from that and spent a little time on the beach. You had 30 days to get on another ship. Which reminds me, while I'm talking about this, I have a little book here. It says here, a lot of people didn't realize we had to pay union dues to be in the union. And anyhow, we had 30 days to get another ship. And we shipped out of New York the rest of the time during the war. And I think I sailed on 3 different transports for troop transports, Liberty ships and 1 tanker. And the last trip I got on in New York City, my buddy couldn't go. He was ill, and I had a ship out without him. Got on New York, went to New Orleans and loaded the ship full of ammunition, took it through the canal, wound up in the Philippines, and we were there unloading it when they dropped the bomb. And the closest thing I ever knew about a submarine was we were leaving Boston one day, and a line of ships going up to Nova Scotia. And we had a Corvette in front, Corvette in back. And we were the tail end of the ship in the bunch, and we were working down around the engine room at that time. We transferred into the engine room. And felt like we got hit with a torpedo. The whole ship went like this. What it was when we got up on top, we looked aft and I seen the bow of the submarine come up and go down. They picked it up behind us and picked him up and dropped those depth charges in. So that's the closest I know if I got the torpedo.
Great, thank you.
Why don't we go down that
Okay.
way?
Okay, who'd like to go next? Yeah, what's your name and how did you come to serve in the Merchant Marine?
My name is Nels Alfredson. I went into the military in 1943. I was 15 years old. I sailed in the South Pacific on a tanker, and when I became 17, I joined the United States Marine Corps, and I spent the rest of the war in the Marine Corps in the South Pacific.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Did we miss you? Go ahead.
My name's Don Freeby. I spent 3 years on tankers and Liberty ships. I got into the Merchant Marine because a close friend of mine, we were buddies and we were going to do things together. And he had a bad ear, kind of a chronic infection in his ears, and he expected to be able only to get in as a draftee if we didn't go in together. And we ran into a classmate of ours who happened to be working for the Maritime Service down at the recruiting office downtown Minneapolis. He told us about the Merchant Marine, and we decided that we could both get into that, which we did. And in February of 1943, they sent us out to Sheepshead Bay, New York, where we took our basic training, which was very similar to what they gave naval recruits, seamen. And we got on our first ship as messmen because that was the way to get out of the training. And it happened to be, well, it didn't happen to be a tanker. They were having great difficulty getting crews on the tankers that were going across the North Sea to England. And so they got anybody coming out of training camp usually went aboard a tanker. And that's what happened to us. Fortunately, and I didn't find out until after the war from some of the literature, that the trip we made in the summer of 1943 was the first trip where the U.S. Air Force had coverage across the entire North Atlantic, and the head of the submarine service had pulled all of the German
U-boats.
submarines off, and we didn't have any trouble at all. Where the trip before on the tanker we were on, the fellas told us that they'd been under almost constant attack over to England and back. Then we went out to California, and my friend wanted to come back and sail on the Great Lakes. So I got on a ship that went to Australia, and we stayed down there for a year, going back and forth between Australian ports and the islands north of Australia. We, kind of the high point of my service, I became a cook, and then on my last voyage, I became a chief steward, head of the steward's department, and the high point of all of my sailing was that I was on a victory ship in Tinian Harbor in the summer of 1944 when the Enola Gay took off from there with the atomic bomb. I like to think that the plane went right over our ship because a great many of them did, but I have no way of knowing whether it was the Enola Gay or not. But,
Well, you were there when history was made then.
well, not really knowing that it was being made, but the fellows from the Air Force Base were busy taking bets from the sailors as to how much longer the war was going to last, because they didn't know much, but they knew there was something really big going on that had come in aboard the Indianapolis. But it turned out to be right, because the VJ Day, we were on the way home in the middle of the Pacific when VJ Day occurred in San Francisco.
Thank you. Well, Lloyd, I'll just say a few things about Lloyd. Lloyd was an SBD pilot in the Central Pacific on Enewetak Atoll, or Engebi Airfield. Now, did anybody ever go or stop at Enewetak?
I did.
Well, Lloyd always described it as the garden spot of the Pacific.
It's about 7 foot above sea level. I was standing on the lookout, and the captain said to keep a sharp lookout. And the damn island's only 7 feet above the water. You're almost there before you see it. And there wasn't a thing standing on the island originally that was there. It was wiped out.
Yeah. Well, he's shown me a few of the pictures, and it looks like that. Let's see, who would like to go next? Would you state your name and how you came to serve in the Merchant Marine?
Wallace Stelter, and originally from Ceylon, Minnesota, raised on a dairy farm, and I wanted to join the Air Corps, but my dad wouldn't sign me in. So he was in the trenches in World War II, and he said, stay out as long as you can, I know what it's like. And anyhow, I signed up November 7th of 44 and went to Sheepshead Bay training, and then I went to Baltimore on a USS Navigator. We went out training on Chesapeake Bay, and then from there I went to radio school in Huffman Island, New York for 6 months. And then from there I went to the West Coast, and I was on a Liberty ship there built by Rosie the Riveter. And anyhow, we had lumber in the second hold, and beer in the third, and crosses in the fourth. And number one, we had dynamite, and we had planes on the deck. So now we took off. They couldn't get much of a crew, and we got for the engine department, we got one guy that spent 8 years in Alcatraz, and one guy killed his wife and jumped ship anyhow. And we had 3 Chinese and a Portuguese, and the Chinese, only one knew English. And anyhow, we got out. It took 32 days to get to Manila, Philippines, because the engine crew, 2 of them were drunk all the time. And we floated around till the third guy would get on. He was just out of school. And anyhow, I got there in 32 days. And then they took our ship and converted it to a troop ship. And then on the way back, we had 750 soldiers and 50 officers. And we came back to San Francisco. And then after that, I went to get another ship, but I couldn't get any. So then I hired out, or went to telegraph school at Oakland Pier, California, where they needed operators real bad on the railroad. So then after a couple of weeks of changing over from international code to American Morse railroad code, and they shipped us up to Northern California, and we worked there. Got tired of that. After 3 months, we went to Minnesota, and I hired out on Chicago Northwestern. It's Union Pacific now. Worked 34 years, and that's about it, I guess.
So you had a hold full of beer, and did the crew have access to this, or?
Yes, one deckhand brought a case up to the Radio Shack, and we hid it up there, and so.
It can all come out 70 years later.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see, who would like to go next?
Name's Cal Loss, and I'm similar to a lot of these stories. Got out of high school in 1942, went to Richmond, California to work in a shipyard. Same one that some of these other fellows did, and didn't like it out there really, so I left. Before I left, the boss says, "You can't leave, you're frozen on the job. You'll never get another job." And I said, "Well, I'm leaving, I'm going back to Minnesota." So we came back here, and I applied for entrance into the Royal Norwegian Air Force. And I got a letter from the Norwegian Air Force in Ottawa, Canada, saying, with an application. And about that time, Uncle Sam said no one could join foreign air forces anymore. So 4 of us came up to Minneapolis, and we enlisted at the United States Maritime Service. And the reason I'm emphasizing that, I think that's an important thing we all should remember that went to Sheepshead Bay. We joined the Maritime Service first, and we were sworn into the Maritime Service. Later on, when we left Sheepshead Bay, which was a training station for merchant seamen, we were given a discharge from the Maritime Service, and I still have that. And I say it's important because we were sworn in service in the Maritime Service. We weren't just hired off the streets like a lot of merchant seamen were, because it was a civilian industry before the war. But anyhow, then I went to Sheepshead Bay. First ship out was an old ship down in southern New Jersey. We went down there and got on it, and as luck would have it, it was an all-Norwegian crew. They had lost all their merchant ships in the Norwegian Merchant Marine. So here was an all-Norwegian crew, and they had some vacancies. So 2 of us Americans went on to an American crew, Norwegian flagged with Norwegian sailors, and 2 of us were Americans. And we made a quick trip to England, to Scotland, I shouldn't say England, to Scotland, and it was there that I first saw how bad shape the British and the Scotch people were. This is 1943 now, early. I made a pretty good friend of the chief cook, and he was, as I say, a native Norwegian, and I could talk a little bit of Norwegian at the time. So we went ashore, and he had been there before. We went into a pub, as most sailors did, and he ordered a drink, and he opened up his briefcase and pulled out a lemon. He had been there before. He cut the lemon and squeezed it into his Scotch whiskey. And he threw the lemon into a wastebasket. Now, we're in a pub, upstairs in a pub, and all the employees of that bar raced for that wastebasket to get that squeezed out lemon. They hadn't had fruit since 1939.
Oh, boy.
And they were desperate for citrus fruit. And that was how I saw how desperate England and Scotland really were. And next trip was to Swansea, South Wales, on a different ship, Liberty at that time. And down there, all the lights were off. You go ashore, we were given shore leave, but there were no lights on. You couldn't tell what was open and what was closed. It was all blacked out. It had to be, because of all of the air raids that were coming along. And that wasn't a very long trip. It was only 6 weeks or so. And at that time, they were building up the stores for the invasion of Europe. And every road out of Swansea, Wales, South Wales, there were tanks and trucks and all kinds of equipment parked on both sides of the road. They didn't have a place to put them all. And those would later be put on landing craft to go into the invasion on June the 5th of the war. That went back and came back to New York. I want to explain a little bit about that. At that time, we'd been discharged from the maritime service, but we were merchant seamen. We were civilians. And the hiring service was at the union halls. There were a couple of places you could work for companies, but the union halls, there's the NMU, the SUP, and there's several unions. And they maintained the hiring hall, so that's where I hired out after that. And the next trip was to the Mediterranean. And just going to mention the first trip out in 1942, I neglected to say that, formed a convoy outside of New York City. And about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there was a large explosion and a black cloud, and it was a ship went out, and we were told it was an ammunition ship that had been hit, and there was nothing left of it. So I got to thinking I might have made a mistake in joining up in this outfit. But I did stay on and made 16 trips crossing to the North Atlantic, and part of them into the Mediterranean. And I remember when we came into the Mediterranean, we stopped at Gibraltar, and they came aboard and made arrangements to put barrage balloons on our ship to go further into the Mediterranean because the Germans were bombing ships. So the barrage balloons were raised, and they had cables hanging down, so the airplanes couldn't get there. I think the first trip we went into Iran, North Africa, eventually went into Sicily and Italy, and that was about the end of the Mediterranean. Then decided to try to get into the Pacific, and I did spend quite a bit of time in the Pacific. I stayed in until 1948, and then I think it was May of '48, and never went back to sea after that. And somebody talked about quitting a job that you were frozen on, and they did in fact draft you if you did that. And I think there are some people in here that were drafted into the Army because of it. It often made me wonder why we were on ships, primarily a lot of Liberty ships and T2 tankers. They were the big manufacturers. We were on them with a American, U.S. Navy gun crew. Now, why could that gun crew, 27 people usually, why could they be considered veterans and the merchant crews, same ship, same travels, couldn't be called veterans. And to this day, we have organizations that won't admit it. We were given veteran status in 1988, and this organization, American Legion, has accepted us willingly. There is another organization, the VFW, they still officially are not taking merchant seamen of World War II into their ranks. And I think that's kind of wrong in a way too.
I don't understand that. You were in the war zone as soon as you left the port, weren't you?
Well, the big argument was, well, you're making more money than that armed guard, the Navy armed guard. They came in at 21 bucks a month. We made $87 a month, but no one seems to remember we had to buy our own clothes. We had to pay our own shipping back and forth if we were on a train. Some people got transferred to, say, to Los Angeles to go out, and they wanted to come back to New York. They had to pay their own train fare back to New York. Everything was based on that $87 that we got when we first started. You make too much money. That's why you shouldn't be considered veterans. And then also, you're shipping out of a union hall. The reason you went out of a union hall is because the government, which was called the War Shipping Administration, had contracted with the union halls to be the hiring places for us to get in. And I think most everybody did hire out through a union hall, whether we wanted to or not. That was the place we did. The union hall happened to be right next to the hotel that we were first assigned to from Sheepshead Bay, which was the training station. That happened to be what they call the National Maritime Union, the NMU. And that was one of the reasons that the service clubs didn't want to let us join until 1988.
Well, thank you. Would you like to go next?
Okay, my name is Don Runmark. I served as a commercial radio operator on board ship during World War II. I first heard about the Merchant Marine when I read an article in the Minneapolis newspaper that the training division of the Merchant Marine, U.S. Maritime Service, was looking for candidates to go to a radio school in Boston. I had been technically trained in electronics earlier and was interested in radio, and so I immediately, I'm thinking it was exactly during the Pearl Harbor week, went to the office in Minneapolis, got an application, sent that in, and a couple months later was accepted to go to the radio school in Boston, Gallups Island, where we spent most of 1972 in training. Following that, went to New York, got a ship, went to Casablanca, and with supplies, troops, tanks, and for the North African affairs. From there, went to Gibraltar, Scotland, London. Was in London while they were bombing there. It went home via the North Atlantic. Sailing the North Atlantic, I decided I had enough of that and went to the Pacific and sailed out of San Francisco the rest of the war. Carrying supplies and troops to New Guinea, Australia, and later technical material to the Philippines. Following General MacArthur there, about a month later, to Lady Bay. Went back to San Francisco. I ended up going to a ammunition depot in Seattle. Took ammunition to the Lady Bay, where we served bombs, shells to the primarily to the fleet in Leyte. Spent the most of 1945 there. the last trip, we took the long road through Panama Canal back to New York with our ammunition. Discharged that in New Jersey. I went home, and that was the end of my sailing in the Merchant Marine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you want to?
Yeah, you've heard all of the interesting stories, but I was, before I graduated, I had gone down to Minneapolis and taken a physical to join the Navy. They wouldn't take me because they said I had a bad heart. Turned out it was just a cold heart. I didn't know what that meant. But anyway, we went we graduated one day and we were on our way to Sheepshead Bay to training the next day. We took our training, and I happened to end up in the black gang. Everybody knows that's the engine room. And we got some advanced training, and then we were assigned a ship. And they trained me down to Miami, and they flew us down to Panama. On the plane, it was a 2-engine plane, and we got about 2 hours out of Miami. One engine quit, which was kind of exciting. And so they turned around and headed back to Miami. And we got there, and the other engine started to sputter, but they let it okay. Well, they were going to take the plane in and repair it, but they couldn't find any mechanics. So the pilot did it himself. He took out the filters and found out that both filters were plugged up. So he changed those out, and we took off for Panama again. And my first ship was a World War I vintage ship. It was a quadruple expansion, and I know that some of the guys in the engine room know what that was. But it was kind of exciting. I really didn't have any experiences that were very exciting. I remember we took a couple of trips down to the Caribbean, and if anybody had traveled along the shoreline of Cape Hatteras, Virginia, they probably had noticed the number of masts that were sticking out of the water that had been torpedoed by U-boats. I sailed 2 ships in the Atlantic, and then we transferred to the Pacific. We caught a Army transport ship there, went to the Philippines, and made a trip through a typhoon up to Shanghai, China, and took out the last of the dependents before the Chinese communists took over, which was kind of exciting. But that was about the end of it.
Right. Well, I'll have to preface my little speech by saying first that I met my friend here, Roy Ferdine, president of our club currently. I met him in junior high school in our little small town that we came from. And so everything is going to almost all include Roy. First of all, I'll say that I grew up on a farm. My dad moved to California to work in the shipyard in 1942, I think it was. He came back in 43 and brought the rest of us back there to California, where I was at 16. I went to work in the shipyard, the same shipyard that everybody's talking about here. I was in Yard 2 in Richmond, California. And I stayed there until about middle of 44. And then I went back to Minnesota and finished my high school. So in 1945, I got out at 17, and Roy and I had already decided we were going to join the Merchant Marine, and that was, in my case at least, because this friend of mine, right there, his name was Norm Carty, he said that if you join the Merchant Marine, you can be on a ship in 3 weeks. And it was getting near the end of the war, and I wanted to be part of it. So anyway, I thought, well, that wasn't too bad. So after, like Roy, I joined the Merchant Marine. We came down just before graduation, and the day after graduation, we were gone. We went to Maritime Service out in Sheepshead Bay, and unfortunately, I suppose, or something, instead of 3 weeks, they put me in engine room training. So I became a water tender, a oiler, and what else? Wiper. Okay. Oiler, water tender, and what?
Fireman,
Can't even think.
fireman.
Yeah, firemen. We had to keep the fires burning in the ship. Let me see, after that, after training, I got I went down to Richmond, Virginia. They put us on a train and sent us down there to pick up a ship. And on the way down, we heard that war was over. And so we got on our ship and we came back into Baltimore on an empty ship. We was loading up for Holland. And I had some time off and went downtown to Baltimore, and what a riot that was. The ship, I mean, the war being over. People were filled the streets, pretty girls as well as others. I don't remember who they were. but anyway, we got on the ship and started out. I was probably half an hour into our trip down Chesapeake Bay. I started getting sick. I think I was sick for possibly 2 weeks on our way to the Netherlands. After I finally settled down and could do something besides sleep in my watch, I settled down and everything was pretty good after that. Came back to New York and got another ship and went back to England, and finally let me see, decided to go to see my parents who lived in California at the time, and so I hitchhiked to California, got on a tanker and went to Tinian Island in the Marianas in the Pacific. And came back from that, and let me see. Anyway, a couple more trips, and then came back to Minnesota to see my friends there. And myself and Roy and this other guy that I was talking about here, we were 3 good buddies, and we got on joined the Army transport in San Francisco and got on a transport ship. We took the what do they call them? Occupation troops. Hauled them overseas and picked up veterans and brought them back to our country. and we made about 3 trips of those, and then in 47, I stopped and became a civilian again. Not that I wasn't a civilian all the time. Thank you.
Sue, is it okay for maybe one more question, do you think, with the time? If people have to leave, just feel free to, you may have other things. But I've got a question, and maybe I'll open this up just sort of to the group for people to answer. I ran across this on the internet. It said that the highest casualty rate of any service during World War II was the Merchant Marine, and had 1 in 26 were killed. There were 9,300 mariners were killed and 12,000 wounded. So obviously it was a dangerous occupation to have been in. And I assume the goal was not to run into the enemy, because you were basically in a, I assume, mostly unarmed ship. So my question, I guess, would be, what did you do to defend yourselves? Did you have convoys, or did you zigzag, or how did you, and I heard about the barrage balloons, that's very interesting, being towed. But what kind of armament, and then the other part of this is, did you ever have contact with the enemy in terms of submarines or aircraft or mines or whatever? So I'll just open this up to the group, and maybe people could raise their hand and tell some stories. Do you want to start? Okay.
We were armed. I don't know, somebody seems to think we're not armed, but most ships had 8 20mm machine guns on, and generally a deck gun on the bow, a 3-inch for aircraft, and a 4, and the first ship I was on happened to have a World War I 4-inch 51, a big weapon on the back and on the stern. And I remember we had gunnery practice one day, and incidentally, all of our merchant crew were expected to be part of the team. I was a loader on a 20mm in the Philippines, and I don't remember the name of that last invasion, where started the end of the war in the Philippines, but they attribute my hearing loss to the fact that I was on a 20mm gun, so we were armed. The big one, the 4-inch on the stern on the older vessels, my goodness, they fired that off one time and it broke all the portholes on the ship. It wasn't used to firing across, I don't remember what the term they used for firing to the side. And it was a big weapon. It was bag ammunition, where they loaded bags of powder into it instead of a shell. I don't know where it came out that we weren't armed, because we were armed. That's why, again, I think we should be part of the group that received the benefits of the veterans' bills.
Did you all have battle stations or on your ship?
Most of the ships I was on, you had to train on the guns. In case the gun crew got knocked out, you had to pass ammunition to them if it didn't, but you had to be a part of it.
We were a backup for the Army. Every gun position had a backup. And
Then everybody had a lifeboat position.
oh yeah.
I forgot to tell you, when I was talking on mine about the Coast Guard, the last ship I was on, I got in New Orleans, and I met a buddy of mine that got torpedoed down there. Him and I had joined together at the same time, but he was on a different ship than I was all the time. He got torpedoed off of Solano there, and when you got torpedoed, you lost your pay.
Oh yeah.
Took him 3 months to get home. And also, when I was down there, I tried to get off that ship. I'd already signed articles. When you sign articles, you got on a ship. I tried to get off the ship so I could sail with my buddy I met down there. And the Coast Guard came out, nevertheless told me that I'd probably wind up in prison. I broke those articles.
Yeah.
So, with the ship, let me understand, if the ship was torpedoed, you lost your pay?
That's what he told me.
Well, did they pay you up to the...
You didn't get paid from the time the ship went down
Okay.
until you got back and got onto another ship. If it took you a month or 3 months or whatever.
Wow.
And you had to work if you found a ship to come back on, you had to work your way back on that. but you didn't get paid, that was just for your transportation back.
That's amazing.
But we were under jurisdiction of the Coast Guard.
It is true that we did not have arms on the ships in early 1942. We didn't get them until later. But then we all had the armed guard came aboard, and we had the 20mm anti-aircraft gun, the 5-inch aft gun, and the 3-inch forward, which were old guns, old Navy guns from World War I. And that's what we had.
Did you travel as individual ships on the ocean or in convoys or?
Convoys.
Okay.
Mostly in the Atlantic, it's convoy, and never, in Pacific, we were always by ourselves.
Pacific, we sailed alone.
I've always wanted to ask too, what did you think of the Liberty ships? They were produced so quickly. Did you think they were a good ship
They were
or?
slow.
I sailed with a young guy, that he and the chief engineer was the only guy that got off the ship, the thing broke right in half. Liberty ship.
There were
The
2,800.
only reason I got off the ship, that he was walking across the upper deck to wake up the next watch, and the chief engineer, or the chief yeoman was up there on the deck, and the two of them got off there, the rest of them went on those ships.
They call them Kaiser's coffins.
They're okay till you got in a typhoon.
One of
and
the
they
most
usually-
dangerous.
They broke in two right ahead of the bridge.
There were 2,800 Liberty ships built, 12 of them broke. Now that is a pretty good record, really, and the reason they broke, they found out, was the welding in the forward part of the engine room where the settling tanks for fuel oil, if they were empty, the ship became weaker. But there were only a dozen of them out of 2,800, and they saved the war. Without Liberty ships,
Oh,
we would have been up the river.
I was also wondering if you ever ran into bad weather or rough seas. I'm one of those people who gets on a ship that goes to Catalina Island and gets seasick. So I don't know if you ever had problems with seasickness or how you get over it if once you get sick. But did you ever run into any bad weather or storms, or was that a typical thing? Yeah.
The first trip I made was on a tanker across the North Atlantic, and they had rigged up to carry on deck crates of gliders that were subsequently used in the invasion 2 years later. But we ran into a storm up off of Greenland, and it busted up some of those crates of gliders that were made out of heavy 2x4s and so forth. It was a kind of a wild night.
Yeah. Yeah.
the worst storm.
Here, let's do one at a
Oh,
time. We'll start here.
I was on one tanker coming from England to Providence, Rhode Island, in the North Atlantic in February. The weather was terrible. It was a T2, 630 feet long, I think. The ship would go up a wave on one part of it and then down the other side. And one of the waves came across the deck and knocked the watertight door where my office was on the upper deck, knocked it down the passageway. I leaped out of bed knee deep in ice water. I thought, well, that's the end. But we managed to salvage everything. We turned around and went with the storm and built a frame out of wood where the door was and poured it full of concrete. Let it set for a couple of days, and then we turned around and kept going.
I imagine that water is pretty cold. Yeah, you had a...
My first ship was a tanker out of Baltimore, World War I tanker. We went down to Lake Charles, Louisiana to pick some oil up to bring up to Montreal, Canada. And this was in the wintertime. And coming up the East Coast, we were hugging the East Coast because the U-boats was that beautiful place called Cape Hatteras. Now, you don't want to be aboard ship close to Cape Hatteras during the wintertime because it got really, really rough. and the tankers, you know, sitting real low, was just water all over the tank, all over the bulwark. But you were talking about the tankers out in the Pacific. I sailed tankers all during the war. We had what they call a deck cargo, and we carried, I think it was 12 or 18 Black Widow spiders, what they called night fighters for the Navy, and we went to the Solomon Islands there then. But it was a heck of a good ride, you know. But anyway, come see, come saw, you know. But those Liberty ships, I didn't sail cargo ships until after the war, and then we were working for UNRWA then, delivering food over to Europe, you know, United Nations relief. And that was good. Seen a lot of ports and everything.
Well, I'd like to ask another general question. You've had some 70 years now to think about your time in service with the Merchant Marine during World War II. How do you feel about your service, what you did during those years?
Just a good experience.
I'm glad I could do it.
Yeah.
Just glad I could do it. You know, we had a lot of guys that sailed the Murmansk, which was one of the dangerous runs. I sailed with one guy, he got off and on 3 ships before he stayed on one afloat up there.
Did you carry mostly cargo, or did you carry troops? What was the...
Troops on, I had three luxury liners. I got a picture of one here. I was on the Argentina. 3 different luxury ships that were troop carriers.
Mm-hmm.
And then we always brought, when we went back, we always bring casualties back with us, like, you know, from the islands down south or in the overseas.
Our job was to carry anything that the troops needed. Period. Everything.
Went all the way from toilet paper to tanks.
Cigarettes and beer.
Yeah.
A lot of the military commanders, I mean, from MacArthur, the Navy people, all the hot shots, if it wasn't for the Merchant Marine delivering the goods, we would have had one heck of a terrible time fighting the war. And just before Roosevelt died, he was going to sign what the Presidential Act or whatever to make us veterans available, and we didn't. And anyway, we got it much, much later. And after I got married and all that, we bought a house in 1986 up there in Richfield. We bought the house, went to the bank, and he says, well, how are you gonna, the contract, what it was for, you know? I told him my GI Bill. He says, GI Bill? What do you mean GI Bill? And I told him, he says, well, where the heck have you been all this time? I says, I finally got passed.
Yeah.
But Roosevelt and all the European people knew if it wasn't for the Merchant Marine, Patton and the rest of those guys would have had one terrible time fighting the war.
Well, yeah.
One other thing, we didn't only carry American troops, but the Merchant Marine brought thousands of POWs back to this country. And I'll always remember, on one trip back, we had been to Europe and landed in France, and we were loading German POWs to bring them back to this country as prisoners of war. And as they came up the gangplank, I was just a little ways away, and one of them kind of beckoned me and over, and I couldn't speak German, but he could speak a little bit of English. And he was going to go back to this country as a POW, and he wanted to show me this, and he gave me that for a carton of cigarettes. Cigarettes were like money.
Yeah, yeah.
And this guy was a German flyer. He was not a pilot. I've had it interpreted. He was
Navigator, bombardier.
Yeah, a crew member of the airplane.
Yeah.
And that was, he was quite proud of that.
Yeah, this is the equivalent of the Golden Wings.
When he wanted to trade that to me, and I've kept it ever since, and you know, they were just people too. Those guys coming, a lot of them that came on board, prisoners coming back to this country, they were young, really young people.
Well, many years ago, I saw a documentary, and it was called "The Men Who Sailed the Liberty Ships." Would you recommend that as a good source of information, or was it erroneous, or how did you feel about it?
No, he had it right down, boy.
Well,
I've seen it
I
a
thought it
few
was very
times on
impressive,
TV,
yeah.
boy. He crossed the T's and dotted the I's, and it was no hashamusha baloney stuff. It was facts.
Yeah. So would you generally recommend that to your descendants to get a feel of what it was like to be in the Merchant Marine?
I would. I
Okay.
would. Absolutely.
Okay.
And my kids, my grandkids, and my great-grandkids, I'm starting to tell them about the Merchant Marine. And when they come to my house, I'm living below decks because I need a chairlift to go up and down. I got kind of my old age in the accidents, but anyway, I live below deck. And the kids, when they want to come down, they want to ride the trolley, they ask, I'm not permission to come below, or they want to know what time it is when they're down, 2,000 hours. Stella's so mad at me. But the kids love it, and I got all my pictures up on the wall.
Well, the sense I get is that it really wasn't fair, at least from the documentary and what people have said. You know, Roosevelt said, well, we're going to get the benefits for the people in the Merchant Marine.
Yeah.
And then he passed away and they didn't pick it up. So, at least from the documentary, the sense that I had, and I saw this many years ago, and it was a very strong impression, was there was a real injustice in terms of the benefits and the status and the you know, the way you guys were treated after the war ended. So, and I guess there's some activity going on to try and correct some of that.
Well, yes, that is, but eventually we'll get it, but, oh, look, what the hell, we're in the 80s now, you know? Geez, they
It's a
could've
little
done
late,
something
yeah.
else. But every commander, every top 5-star general, 5-star admiral wrote letters after the war, not right away, but after the war, what the Merchant Marine did. And there was this one general in the Air Force that held everything up. I forget his name, but he was in charge of the GI Bill of Rights. That any time we come up about the Merchant Marine, he vetoed it.
Well, because of the time, now you guys are all walking encyclopedias, so I could probably be here for the next 5 hours, and maybe I'll come back, but I want to thank Sue for inviting me to be here and to get some of your, at least a few of your stories recorded on video, and next month I'll have a DVD for everyone. Yeah, did you want to say something?
I remember my husband talking about when they got off on Atlantic, they got this terrible fog, and they had all the ships were hitting each other, and they couldn't see each other because it was so thick. You know, when he talked about, I think I went almost around the world 4 times, and they never told him where they were going. And when he was over at Leyte, he watched a destroyer burn up right alongside of him.
Yeah, that was a
And
dangerous.
they didn't see no land or mail or anything for months or a year at a time. They
Yeah.
didn't know where they were going, they wouldn't tell them, so when they went, they didn't know where they were going and where they'd end up.
One final note.
Mhm.
I was in the hospital with a World War II guy was my bedmate over there. And he asked me what service I'd been in and told him the Merchant Marine. He said, what did you do, have a death wish? That was it.
A lot of people don't realize that the Merchant Marine was the first Navy this country ever had.
Yeah, wasn't there some civilians up in, was it Maine that took on the British?
I think so.
And that was before the Navy was even formed, so, yeah,
1776.
it's an old service. Well, thank you oh, go ahead.
One of the reasons for the delay in getting our benefits was the fact that Harry Truman, who had been a captain of artillery during the Second World War and saw things through the eyes of the Army, didn't push benefits for us, even though Roosevelt was in the midst of trying to get them and would probably have been successful when he passed away. And Truman had very little interest in the sea and in the Navy and the Merchant Marine. It was only because a couple of merchant mariners had spent a week or so in an open life raft in the Indian Ocean and took the whole matter to court that we got what we did get in 1988 through intervention of the courts. But personally, I am very, very happy to have what we have now, and that is access to the Veterans Administration and the Veterans Hospitals and so forth.
Amen.
I get a lot of help from them.
That's interesting about Truman, and Roosevelt, I think, was assistant, or he was the Secretary of the Navy?
Secretary of the Navy.
So he understood what was going on.
Well, and he had grown up sailing and so forth before he got sick, so.
Well, thank you. I'll turn this over then.
All right, we're going to have a cash drawing before we adjourn. So Roy is going to distribute some tickets.
Yeah, this is for the attendance, and you only get one each, and I've got the winner already. All right, 649. On both sides of you
Did
there.
that one work? Gotta be down there.
649.
I think that's me.
All right.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. Oh, I thought it was over with.
Okay, thank you all.
Try your own.
Well, how about that?
Thanks for the cake and coffee.
Nice.
All right,
Welcome.
we're going to have a motion to adjourn.
I'll do it.
Adjourn.
Anybody second that?
Second.
I'll second. Meeting is adjourned.
We did it.